caused people to erupt, express their frustration, anger, hurt, and pain. I know that when I saw the George Floyd tape, I cried. Being a law enforcement officer for 30 years before I retired, it just made my stomach hurt, as I'm sure it did many other people. And so people took to the streets and expressed their anger and frustration. There are people that are engaged in government now like there never have been before. The young people in our community are engaged, they're active, they're talking, and they are talking about policy and policy changes. And we on the Metro Council are listening. Our first form of listening was that last week the council passed the first of its kind in the country, a local ordinance banning no-knock warrants. We call it Breonna's Law. And there are more ordinances and changes to come. As you know, we are in the middle of the budget cycle, even though you don't see a lot of it on the news, that we're still doing that, and we need to be ready to have that ready for next week. And so we're going to be making some changes to the budget based upon what we've been hearing from people. And some of those things are going to be related to alleys and housing and the built environment that people live in throughout our city, but especially in West Louisville. And we are going to make many changes related to that. We're also going to make changes related to a civilian review board and Office of Inspector General for the police department. We're looking at making changes to the way the city handles 911 calls and body camera footage and the Metro Safe call logs that the administration often hides from open records under the claim of that it's currently under investigation. And so those are some of the immediate changes that you're going to see taking place with Metro Council. We're also going to mandate that any police officer who is involved in a critical incident will immediately have to undergo a drug and alcohol screening, which is something that's not currently mandated by law. And so those are some of the things that the Metro Council will be doing. But I want to reflect back on the police a little bit more. I know that we have police officers, 99% of which do everything they want to do. They grew up wanting to be police officers, serving and protecting people. And the 1% that don't do that have tarnished the badges of the others. And so that has to change. And finding the ways to make that change is the Civilian Review Board and the Inspector General is a big tool to help that happen. The officers currently feel the frustrations. Many of them feel the same frustrations that the protesters feel. And they actually, in many ways, are actually on the same side. In some ways, they're not. But the police officers are frustrated with all the scandals on the police department. They're frustrated with the poor leadership of the police department. They're frustrated with leadership not taking appropriate action to clean up the police department. They want those things, just like we want those things, just like the protesters want those things. And so I think that it's important that we as citizens have important conversations like we're doing right now. I think it's important that we have uncomfortable conversations that we're going to do today. And I think that we are going to cry some, and we're going to be angry, and we're going to be embarrassed, and we will come through this on the other side feeling better about everything, and we will make positive changes. But I also feel, knowing that I also wear the hat of a politician now, that I don't want Breonna Taylor, David McAtee, or George Floyd, or Ahmaud Gregory to have died in vain. And so it's important that we take advantage of this moment and change history. And so I'm not going to talk long because I'd rather answer questions. Thank you.
To unmute there. Thank you, David, very much. Katura?
Good afternoon. Thank you all for having me speak in this important discussion. And then I want to thank you all for taking your time out to listen as well. Yes, my name is Katura Herron, and I'm currently a policy strategist at ACLU of Kentucky. But my first political home and learning to organize and do this work comes from Black Lives Matter. I'm still a current member of Black Lives Matter and very active with Black Lives Matter. Speaking about these issues right now, to be honest, it's overwhelming. I'm still processing the death of Breonna Taylor. I'm still processing what is happening right now. And so for me, I've been telling people this is a very bittersweet moment. And I say that because I never thought that in my lifetime that I would see folks in every state and across the world protesting and demanding change, not only within our police department, but how we operate as a whole in our society. And I think that that's what we're seeing. And so I'll just lay out a couple of things. The first off, the main things that Black Lives Matter here in Louisville has focused on the last couple of years mainly has been racial justice, housing justice, environmental justice, and justice within our school systems. And basically what that means is that really focusing and making sure that Black Kentuckians and Black folks in Louisville have the same opportunities and playing fields as their white counterparts. I believe that when someone asked a question about structural racism, and I believe that what you have seen and what we have seen is that throughout history, when policies have been made on either the federal level or the local level, they're either made without Black folks being at the forefront of how that's going to impact them, or intentionally made for Black folks to control them. For example, back in the 70s when Nixon talked about some of the first initial drug laws that he wanted to implement, he stated that these laws are going to be for Black people and white hippies. And so I think that what we've seen nationally when it comes to different legislation and policies implemented is that it's been a way to control a certain demographic of folks. And so what we try to do and what we're trying to do, and I think that what we're seeing across the nation is people are saying that enough is enough, and we have to shift and change those policies that we have been operating under historically. And until we dismantle those policies and start living by a different set of rules and practices and policies, we're not going to see that. I've been very involved with, was very involved with getting Breonna's Law passed here at Metro Council. President David James has been amazing to work with. We disagree on a lot of things. We're texting yesterday and disagreed on things, but one thing that I'm learning, and I know that regardless if we disagree or not, it's important that we work together. And I think that, excuse me, that's my cat Stokely that makes appearances every now and then. But one thing that we know that at the end of the day, we're all trying to get to a certain spot, and it's just a matter of what language we're using and how do we make sure that we understand each other's language in terminology, and then how we can come together and build. And just like David James, I would prefer to answer questions, but one thing that I would leave with you all initially right now is what I would challenge you all as a group and as individuals in your own lives or individuals in your own businesses is that what type of policies and practices are you living by that's either keeping out a group of folks or that is oppressing a group of folks. And I think that we all can take some time to really dig into our own personal lanes, how we can make an impact and start doing that. And I think that having these conversations right now is a great first step for that overall systematic change. And it's not just financial. I think a lot of times people are like, well, if we put this money or these programs into this area, things are going to change. Those things are helpful, but it's also what are those laws, what are those policies, and how are we operating, and what is our individual biases that we're operating from.
Thank you both so much. Am I unmuted? Yeah. So we have a lot of questions. Let's just start with this one. And from Owen, who's a former prosecutor, we know Fred. What is the ongoing effect of slavery today, both on white attitudes and behavior and Black attitudes and behavior, for both of you, if you could? And if you could explain, Keturah, the difference between equality and equity.
Right. I think that when we look at slavery and policing, we all know that the first police departments were developed in our nation to catch and gather runaway slaves. And so it's always been a situation of being in control of a set of people and bodies. And like I've said, like I kind of hit on previously, as you look at the different laws that have impacted our nation as a whole, and you look at the drug laws that have happened in the 70s, definitely in the 80s and the 90s, and how you had the differences between crack and cocaine, pretty much the same drug, but used in a different type of substance. And the penalties for those drugs, for crack cocaine, which historically was used more by the Black community, those consequences held a higher penalty. So that's one of the reasons why you see more Black and brown folks incarcerated. And so when we look at how that impacts the whole community, is that if we are breaking those communities and those homes, those family systems, what is that then doing to the children of those families? And how are those children been able to heal and then operate in a world without their parents? So that's one of the things when I think about policing and how that goes. And then even I think, here in LMPD, and President James has talked about it, where there was one point in time that the mayor and LMPD intentionally said that we are going to make stops in the West End if someone has a broken taillight or if their license plate isn't illuminated. We're going to do those things to see if we can get other things, other crimes. And so when we're talking about just the way that we are policing communities, it is a way that shows up. And the last question, as far as equity and inequality, there's one thing of saying that Johnny White, a white Johnny, and Johnny Black, a Black Johnny, how do we make sure that they have the same playing field? Like, how do we make sure that they have the same things, right? And so if Johnny Black has been impacted and hasn't had his mother and father in a home due to some of the racist policies of over policing and those things, but Johnny White has those things, how is that impacting them both when they're sitting in a classroom at school? And so one example that I'll use, there was the program Cards. I can't remember the name of it, but basically they were providing mental health services at Shawnee High School. And when they first did the program, the lady who was running it, she said that she noticed that they had more white students who were referred for counseling services than they did Black students. And Shawnee High School is a predominantly Black high school. And what she did was she went back and looked at the referrals from the teachers on those same days to see what was happening or what was laid out, in the paperwork and the referrals. And what she noticed was the Black students and the white students had the same type of behaviors, withdrawn, not paying attention, didn't want to engage. But they looked at that from the white students' perspective was that they need mental health services. And from the Black students' perspective, they looked at that as being defiance. And so I think that historically, we just look at Black folks and white folks different. And that's just a bias. And we have to check that whenever we're dealing and working with people.
Thank you, David. Did you have a comment?
Yeah, I would just echo everything that Keturah had just said, but I would also say when we talk about the slavery then to now, the police department has always been the arm of government that has enforced those laws, segregation, voting, all of those things. The police department has been used to do throughout history, and that history carries on. Prior to me joining the police department, just prior to me joining the police department, there was a Supreme Court ruling that said no longer could police shoot and kill people that were fleeing felons, meaning that when the police arrived on the scene of a, say, burglary, and someone crawled out the window and then ran away, the police were allowed to shoot them. And so, but during that time on the Louisville Police Department, the districts, the individual districts had pools of money they would collect every month. And the white officer that could shoot the most Black people would get that pool of money as a reward. And so we're not that far from there. So I think that when you think about slavery and how police were used as a tool of that and how they were used as a suppression tool of a particular race, I think that we have to look at that. And I think in the city of Louisville in particular, which is one of the most segregated, top 5 segregated cities in the country, we have to look at our history and where we came from and how redlining and other things have affected us. I think we look at sometimes our beautiful downtown and the historic buildings, but we don't really recognize what that's all about. The very spot that Keturah and others are out there protesting in, Jefferson Square, that's where the city collected tax money for selling slaves. That's how the city hall that my office is in was built, slave money. The street that the commerce goes up and down on Jefferson and Main Street was built by slaves. And we use that same street today for commerce. And I just like people to really think about that. And so I think that how we talk about that and how we come to those terms and understand that is very, very important. I think the police department in particular tries not to even have that conversation with its own officers. I've had officers recently call me and say, I just need some help trying to understand what's going on, you and our friends, but I thought slavery was over with 200 years ago. I don't understand why people are upset. So that tells me is we've done a horrible job equipping our officers before we put them in an urban environment and say, go police, without any context of what they're doing.
Okay, this is a question for you, Councilman James, from Denise Sears. She says, my years working with families in the West Louisville area and professional experience driving cultural changes made me an advocate for the voice of Black neighbors in the selection process of the new police chief. Other than the survey, what will be done to ensure people from the West End will have a representative voice in the vetting and interviewing process?
So the mayor has one plan that he plans on. The council has another plan. And part of the council's plan is that we are going to have listening sessions at different places, including West Louisville, where we will be inviting people to come out and talk about what they want to see in the police department and in the new police chief. And once we get to a finalist list, you know, the top 5 or whatever that may be, our plan is that the citizens have an opportunity to sit down with those candidates and ask them questions and interview them and hear what they have to say. That was something that Mayor Abramson did when he selected Robert White. That is something the Jefferson County Public School System did when they selected Marty Polio. And that is something that the Louisville Metro government should do when we select a new police chief.
For Keturah, this question, Doug Scott is asking, is there a comprehensive list of policies that Black Lives Matter are interested in reforming or changing, either locally and or nationally?
Yes, right now, locally, our main focus currently is firing, arrest, prosecuting the police officers who were involved in her death. That's the main, the upfront right now. The other thing that we've been working on is looking at our city budget and divesting and taking away money from different areas and investing into the community. And so, for example, we know that LMPD has had huge amount of money spent in overtime. And, you know, how are we able to divest and take away some of that money and put that money into community services? I know that a lot of times we talk about affordable housing, but not just affordable housing, but also home ownership. How do we make sure that Black folks have access and money to become entrepreneurs? And then also, how do we make sure that our students are being educated in an equitable way? And then also, of course, the police accountability. I think that in the moment, in the heat of what we're seeing around Breonna's case, and people being out in the streets right now, it's about police accountability. And one thing that I really want to lift up and I want people to understand is that we know and we understand that policing is going to be around. I mean, there's a thing of reforming police, and then there's also a thing of abolition of police departments. We're not going to get to a spot of abolition. What does that mean? However, what we do want to do is we want to identify, I know that some of you are business owners. As a business owner, when you have employees working for you and you see that they're not fit for your company, they're either not coming back on break on time, or they're not producing what it is that you need to produce, or they're just a bad face for your company. That's the same things that we want for our police department. When we recognize that there's a bad police officer, for whatever reason, maybe they've been traumatized in the line of duty, or maybe they're just not a good fit, and they haven't been able to interact with the community in a positive way. How do we make sure that we're able to get rid of them? And maybe it looks like helping them get to another career path. We understand and know that they have families that they need to take care of as well. So maybe it is helping them go to another career path. But our main thing is that when we identify that there's a bad police officer within our police force in Jefferson County, whether it's LMPD, St. Matthews, or whoever, how do we get rid of that police officer and say, hey, this is not the job for you. This is not the fit for you. We want to make sure that you and your family's protected. We want to make sure that our community's protected, but it's time for you to go to a different path. More than anything, we want Black folks to be able to live and survive the same way that white folks are living and surviving.
David, this is for you. It's a two-pronged question. One has to do with Mayor Fisher and why he's being criticized, and what would you like for the mayor to say the police officers? The second is from Michelle Oberst, who to you, she says, thank you for your leadership. George Rodman said on WHAS radio that the mayor actually runs the police department. The police chief has very little decision-making power. How difficult will it be to hire a police chief that can come in and make the necessary changes, gain the respect of the officers and the community, if what Mr. Rodman said is true?
That's a good question. I have said to many people, yeah, we can get a new police chief, but if the mayor doesn't let him be the police chief, then it's going to be difficult to be the police chief. That's why Robert White left, right? So I think that it's important, though, that we do have a new police chief, one that has good character and doesn't try to cover up crimes and hide things in the police department. I think all those things are important. The criticism that you have heard about the mayor has to do a great deal with the way this entire situation has been managed. It's no secret that many people on the council are unhappy about that. Many people in the community are unhappy about that. It could be easily said that if the mayor had have gotten rid of the police chief 3 years ago, when the Metro Council voted for that, that we would not be here having this conversation right now. Mayor does not want to address that situation, does not want to talk about it. We had to go through, children being molested, overtime, Black people being stopped in West Louisville at disproportionate rates, just all sorts of scandal after scandal after scandal on our police department until Breonna Taylor ends up dead, David McAtee ends up dead, and then we finally decide we're going to fire the police chief. It is unbelievable, unacceptable, and I don't even have words for it that I can say beyond this point in a public telephone call.
I would like to jump in really quick since you brought up David McAtee and someone had asked about structural racism. I would like to paint a picture for you all, is that David McAtee was a pillar in the community in the West End. He was someone who fed homeless folks. He fed children and families who was hungry. He fed LMPD. He did a lot of work with Volunteers of America. Mr. McAtee's barbecue spot was open late hours. I have a friend who worked second shift and oftentimes wouldn't get home till 12:30 and 1 or 1 o'clock in the morning. And that was a place, the only place that she could go at night when she's going home in the West End to get food. And so when we talk about what, now that he's no longer there, the death of him, like what that has done to this ecosystem of not just people in the West End, but as a community as a whole, like we have literally put a hole in our city. And so, and one of the things with the David McAtee case, there had not been any protest in the West End Thursday, Friday, or Saturday, or Sunday. Folks who were protesting purposely made sure that people weren't in the West End. And at that spot, by Dino's, by the barbecue spot, that was a regular gathering of people because that's the culture and that's what has always historically happened. That's where people were. And so now you talk about bringing in militarization in the Black community. The first time that the National Guard comes down to the West End, we literally are taking away a whole ecosystem that impacted thousands of people in the city, not just people in the West End. And so when we talk about structural racism, that is that's an example of structural racism, bringing in the military in a spot in the community that had not been having issues, had not been having protests. And within a matter of minutes, the first time that they're there, they have now taken away someone who impacted thousands of folks in Louisville, not just people in the West End and not just the Black community.
Tora, can you help us with this question? What can Rotary do as an organization to address the issue of social and racial injustice? What would be most helpful?
I think the biggest thing, the first thing, what you are doing right now is helpful. You all acknowledging and realizing that there's something that it's time for you all to step up. I think that when it comes to action, I think that it's taking a deeper look and understanding, even with your all's own policies and bylaws. Like, I'm not very familiar with the Rotary Club or what you all doing, but even taking a deeper racial impact lens study or look at how you all operate as a group. You know, what are the things that you all historically have supported? What are the things that historically you haven't supported? And how have you supported those things? And being a voice, I think that what's important is that it's your all's voice that has power and has influence. And I think that it's important that as this group continues, that you use your voice to lift up those things, but then also support the things that the grassroots folks such as Black Lives Matter or L Surge is another good group that I would recommend you all look into, standing up for social justice. And then the Kentucky Alliance, really getting behind those groups of the work that they're doing, and really taking the lead from them and pushing the same things that they're wanting.
David?
I would say I just want to follow up what Couture had mentioned about David McAtee when you think about implicit bias. Do you think that the National Guard and the police would have rolled up to a location at the summit if there were a group of people out violating the curfew, and within 3 seconds of exiting the vehicle started screaming at them about violating the curfew and then began shooting them with pepper ball guns? I don't think so. But that seemed like a great thing to do at 26th and Broadway. Why? Don't know. But onto the question, I think that that it's important that the Rotary Club, I know that you all recently, last year I think it was, did the scholarships. I think that's really great. But I also think it's important for each of us to look within ourselves first and check ourselves for our biases. I believe we all have some form of bias about something. And, I know what mine are. And so I always have to check myself before I open my mouth about certain things, and make sure that I am aware of what I am biased about. But beyond that, I think it's important to look around at certain institutions around us and put pressure on those institutions. For example, the Jefferson County Sheriff's Department. Look at the executive staff of the Jefferson County Sheriff's Department. Not a single person of color in that department is in charge. Look at the Circuit Court Clerk's office, David Nicholson. Not a single person of color is in the executive staff of that elected official's office. And it's important upon us and people like you to bring that to their attention and make sure that changes. I think it's also important that we look at the police department. And, the Public Integrity Unit is the unit that's investigating these killings by the police department. And there is not a single Black person that's an investigator in that unit. And so it's important that those types of things take place. It's important that the employees of Metro government look like Metro Louisville. And that is not what's taking place. And so it's important to put pressure on that. It's important that business owners in our community, when there's vacant positions, that they actually reach out and try to find qualified employees to fill those slots, not just the friends of a friend that you play golf with. It's important to model certain behaviors for your children. So if you always have parties or have people come to your house for dinner that are friends, then those friends should not always all look like you. And so I think those are some of the important things that have to take place for us all to try to understand what takes place. And I know that some people say, well, this thing about the police, I don't really understand why Black people are scared of the police. I'm a Black man. I'm scared of the police. I used to be the police. When you see me out walking around in the protest area talking to Couture and other people over there, you generally see me with my Louisville Metro shirt on, that Councilman David James. I don't want to be mistaken for somebody else. And so there's a reason for that. There's a reason that when my child was growing up and she started driving, that I talked to her about what to do when the police stop you, because you're a Black female. I don't want anything bad to happen to you. There's a reason that my father had that same conversation with me. And so I think that consciousness that African Americans, especially males, constantly think about is a always thing that is always on your mind. I think that it's important for everybody to understand that it's important that the police department treat its citizens the same. I often tell people that the police department serves and protects in East Louisville, but they enforce the law in West Louisville, and it should not be that way.
All right, thank you both very much. I'm going to turn it back over to President Luke. And I think, Luke, if we forgot to do the four-way test, and if we'd done that, I think it would have answered Katura's question. But we're going to turn it over to you. Thank you both very much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Jean, and thank you, David. Thank you, Katura. In listening to all of this, I think this is absolutely one of the very best programs that we've had in a long, long time. And I've learned a lot listening to this. I'm going to probably watch it again and see what I missed. But I hope this challenges our members to begin thinking about getting engaged in these issues. We all live here. David, I think your point about the summit really rings true. And I think that was an excellent point. So anyway, and Jean, you're right on the four-way test. Frankly, if everybody around the world took it every morning, I think we'd have a better planet. So anyway, I guess enough pontificating on my part. I want to thank everybody for being here today, and I want to thank our two guests. These are challenging times. Let's all work together to see what we can do to make this a better city. And as reminders, please watch your emails regarding next week's program and any other updates on summer events. And with that, we are adjourned. Thank you.